The pre-season testing is here, and some of the teams have come up with what seems to be quite a revolutionary approach to their challenges for the upcoming season. With Red Bull being the team to beat, the pressure is mounted on the Austrian squad to prove that their new design, borrowed from Mercedes' philosophy in the past 2 years, will work wonders. However, the Brackley-based squad have come up with some innovations that caught the experts of the sport by quite some surprise. Will any of the teams have any leverage over Red Bull in the following campaign? And what are some of the biggest pros and cons that we've been able to witness from the first day of pre-season testing? All of the media's eyes are focused on the RB20, not because it's the car to beat, but because it has a very interesting change of concept, one that's been dubbed as a failure from Mercedes in the past couple of years. Some of the F1 experts believe that the RB20 that we saw on launch day is just a dummy and won't be nearly the same today. But they were utterly wrong, and Red Bull is here to prove that just because it didn't work for Mercedes, it doesn't mean it can't work for them as well. One of the smaller issues that the RB20 had on the track were the notable amounts of understeer, as Verstappen reported on the radio. This is quite the contrary of what he likes in a car, and most certainly, the team would be working on trying to optimize the setup for the Dutchman in the following period. And while it's not something that should bother them a lot, the entire philosophy of the car will undergo a huge challenge in the following period. What we can note so far is that the car looks very stable. The lack of flow vis indicates that the engineers are quite confident in the airflow that the car receives with this controversial design. And although there's a lot of fuss around the philosophy of the car, so far it's proving to be the car to beat in 2024. But according to Helmut Marko, the design of the car is something that could go wrong for them, just like it did for Mercedes. Mostly because they're also entering an unknown territory with it. It's worth mentioning that Red Bull plans to further develop the zero-pod philosophy of their car, from Suzuka onwards, and while we're not going to see any of this during the pre-season testing or the first couple of races, this has the potential to be the turning point of Red Bull's season. Adding to this matter even further, Marko said, "Red Bull did very well in the simulator, but Mercedes were also convinced by the data of their side-pod concept. In practice, it didn't work at all, and we will see in the tests whether we can successfully implement this solution, or let's say a similar solution. Adrian Newey would always like to have cars without radiators. Of course, that's not possible for the engineers, but it's logical. One of Red Bull's closest competitors during the testing was Ferrari, and the Maranello team have worked a lot in revamping the entire car in order to not only dismiss the limitations that their previous chassis implied on the car, but also to make sure that they can further evolve what they've presented to the world in Bahrain. Leclerc tested out the SF24 during this morning's session, while Sainz had an opportunity to meet the car in the afternoon period, and apart from the lockups that happened on multiple occasions, it seems like the car struggled a bit with the balance of the car, something that was likely triggered by the wind and something that Ferrari has tendencies to struggle with in these pre-season testing sessions, if we're to judge by proximate history. Leclerc and Sainz both had a decent amount of off-track moments, most of them happening by the instability and the fact that the car had both under and oversteering moments itself. Another interesting issue that appeared on the SF24 was the bouncing that happened at the end of the main straight as the Monegasque was approaching the turn 1, which then again didn't cause too much of a hassle for Leclerc, but it's still worth noting as an occurrence for Ferrari. The initial impression is that Ferrari have moved more towards an oversteering car, which is Leclerc's preference compared to Sainz. And now the only visible issue that could very likely have been solved in the following period is the car's behaviour under the wind, something Leclerc has also complained about in 2023. Mercedes is the team that has also had a lot of media attention during the first day of pre-season testing, and the fact that Russell took an extended break of more than half an hour in the morning session has also raised some concerns that Mercedes has already found something wrong with the reliability of the car. This was debunked right away, with Russell completing 48 laps with the car in the morning session. And what was to be expected is Mercedes' front wing performance, as the team has gone throughout the entire day chasing race pace simulations, with almost no low fuel laps. The entire buzz was around the invention that the Silver Arrows made, with the third flap being attached by a small piece of carbon wire on the front wing, which is a unique interpretation of the rulebook. But according to the tech experts, the FIA proclaiming the wing as legal is something that could benefit Mercedes a lot because of the fact that it's not easy to copy. It's practically impossible due to the impact it has on the rest of the car. The Silver Arrows have also been related to sandbagging performance, which means they may have deliberately run with higher fuel load or with a lower engine performance in order to not show their cards right away on day 1. This would make a lot of sense considering they have a lot to show to the F1 world with their brand new design. When talking about the most interesting aspect of their car, which is the front wing, the F1 tech expert Sam Collins went on to say, Mercedes decided they wanted to have an old front wing. Looking at the Sauber, the upper element, the top blade of the front wing, that's what everyone thought the rules should be, but if you look at the other end, there's just a tiny bit of a linkage at the end plate. That little black section keeps that legal. Mercedes has taken that concept, flipped it on its head, and cut away that whole inner section of the front wing. It's something every team up and down the pit lane will be scurrying off into the wind tunnel to take a really close look at what the team is trying to do. It's not something you can just copy. It has a massive impact on all of the rest of the car. Ted Kravitz has also talked with John Owen, who's the chief designer of Mercedes, regarding the aerodynamic gains of the car. And when answering the question of who did the best work in the previous period, Owen answered, "I would say hats off to our aero team. Whether or not they have done a good job with the brand new design, time will tell, but what we can definitely say is that the Silver Arrows will have some pretty tough competition with their customer teams, such as McLaren." However, the pre-season testing did show some issues with the Woking-based squad, such as Lando Norris witnessing some issues in terms of reliability. But what is definitely good news is that the race pace of the car seems pretty decent, and that shows the fact that McLaren's development path has been followed successfully in the previous winter season. Obviously, McLaren has struggled a lot during this period last year, but right now the expectations from them are quite high, considering that they were the most consistent challenger for Red Bull during the second half of last season. And that is why the media paid a lot of attention to how the car would behave in Bahrain today. Similar to Mercedes, McLaren did no low fuel laps, and it's still a mystery when it comes to whether or not they found enough pace to challenge Red Bull in the following period. Aston Martin were also quite satisfied with the reliability of their car, as Alonso started the morning session by driving the most amount of laps in race pace simulation, showing that the car is slowly but surely approaching its optimal performing window. This was further proven by Stroll in the afternoon session, and considering the fact that the Silverstone-based squad ended the last season on a positive note, we're very likely to see the development continuing throughout the following races and the Spaniard return to the podium finishes much more frequently. The most attractive and controversial team at the same time, VCarb, have debuted their first version of their car on the grid, and so far it does look like an exact copy of the RB19. The times were also there. Tsunoda managed to complete 64 laps in the morning session and have the 5th fastest time on the grid, which, although doesn't mean that much, shows that maybe we'll see them more often in the top midfield. To top that off, Ricciardo finished 4th in the afternoon session, and although it's too early to hype them up, we might have a new midfield competitor for the 2024 season. One of the most disappointing statements came from Haas, as the American squad focused a lot on the tyre degradation and not on the overall performance of the car, an issue many believed should have been fixed by now during their winter break. Obviously, a lot of pressure will be mounted on Gene Haas and the new team principal and Io Komatsu, who would have to prove to the world that the sport didn't do a mistake by not allowing Andretti to enter when there's a team like Haas already present and racing. Right now, the general belief is that they will be again the slowest team on track because of the lack of knowledge and connection with their car, as the old issues are still being addressed in the new season. Haas really didn't come up with something new with their car, and if this continues, then it's obvious that the team would face a lot of scrutiny for its existence in the sport in 2024. With this in mind, which team surprised you the most in the first day of pre-season testing? Let us know in the comments below.